Yep. So yeah, so tonight we're going to be talking about squirrel hunting 101. I don't know where everybody's at in their journey on getting out in the field and hunting, if this is just a new species for you or if you've never hunted before ever. But we'll just kind of get into we'll dabble a little bit in regs, and we'll get into squirrel ecology, their food resources, and how we go about hunting them. I know growing up as a hunter, I've been hunting since I was 12 years old, so this is my 25th season of hunting. The very first thing I ever took was a squirrel. I remember I had a 22 with iron sights, and my dad was sitting there, and he did not expect me to actually, I think, shoot the squirrel. And he's like, "Oh, there's one. Go ahead." And I shot it. He was very, very excited, and it's a memory I have
I love that.
forever. Yeah, like he was just like, "Oh, you got it!" Like that was literally he was. It wasn't like, "Yeah, you got it." It was like, "Oh, wow, good job! Holy cow! Okay, let's go get
You
it."
did it. Yeah.
Yeah, for real. So yeah, so it's awesome memories. It's you can be a little social. We'll talk a little bit about strategy. Some people may be more social than others, and some people may be better at hunting than others. But what are you gonna do? If it gives you a reason to get out, it gives you a reason to get out. But you can hunt more in groups compared to like deer hunting and stuff like that. So that might be an aspect of it that you're interested in as well. But yeah, so we're gonna get into it, but it does give you a kind of similar skills you may need to hunt deer and other animals, and we'll tell you why that is in a little bit. But go ahead, Dan. Why do you
And
like squirrel hunting?
one thing that really appeals to me about squirrel hunting, and you see it a lot on, social media and stuff. And again, we just as our careers have aligned this way, we talk to a lot of hunters, and a lot of hunters like, oh, squirrel hunting's for beginner. It's for kids. It's for I tell you what, some of the most fun I've ever had has been squirrel hunting. I love deer hunting. I won't lie, but there are some times where I don't necessarily want to sit in my tree stand for 4.5 to 5 hours for a full sit. Where squirrel hunting is, as we'll dive into, it's very mobile, and so it's almost like if you've ever had this inkling of going out west and doing some of the spot and stalk style hunts, this is about as close as you can get to it in Illinois. And so it can be a lot of fun. And one thing I really want to point out is it's the first season to open in the fall. And so starting October 1st, you can already start thinking about hunting. And to me, that's awesome, right? You get to get
August
through
1st.
August, September, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, August 1st is when it actually starts, which is wild. It goes August 1st to February 15th. So it's the longest season for well, you can count other animals too. But anyway, it's a very long season.
Very
Um
long.
yeah, so it's a great reason to get back out in the woods and to get started for sure. And then also get the different seasons to see them acting differently. Like I know right now I can't walk my dogs around my neighborhood without chasing them around. I mean, they're out getting getting nuts and everything else right now. So it's definitely a season to be getting out after them.
That it is. And another great, especially when I first started getting into squirrel hunting. So historically, again, I was a deer hunter and I started looking for things to do outside of deer season, and I started deer scouting. And some of my best scouting is now I'm deer scouting while I'm out squirrel hunting. Because again, like you see in this PowerPoint, and you'll learn through today, they are using a lot of the same habitat types. They're using similar food sources, similar forest type stands. And so you're already in these areas that are very, very good for deer. And so if you're a deer hunter and you're just looking for an excuse to get out and do a little bit more scouting, well, heck, carry a shotgun or a 22 with you. And now you get to open up the opportunity to harvest a squirrel or two. And I'll tell you what, the squirrels get a bad rap. I love squirrel meat. It's arguably one of my favorite wild games. Now, you obviously don't get a ton of it, but it is quite tasty. And so I saw your question. Sorry about that. We'll get to that in just a second, but I want to quickly go over regs, and I want to emphasize we are not covering all the regulations. We don't want to sit here and talk for an hour and a half, 2 hours on just regulations. So we're going to speed through these fairly quick, but highly recommend always checking the Illinois Digest of Hunting and Trapping Regulations for the full regulations that'll have everything you need in terms of what you can do, when you can do it, where you can do it, and how you can do it. So we'll kind of cover some of the highlights today. One of the big ones is we need a hunter safety certification. Now, in Illinois, you have a few different options. You can take an instructor led course, which is an in person course, normally over the course of a full weekend. The big challenge there is ever since COVID, there has just not been as many hunter safety courses as there used to be. So if you are over 18 years of age, or older, you do have the option to completely do that online. So if you need that hunter safety credential still, I recommend trying the online course again if you're over 18. If you are under 18, there are a few different options, either the instructor-led course or there's the hybrid, which you take a portion of it online and then you have a small field component. The nice thing is the hunter safety is a one-time thing. So once you have it, you have it. And even better, it has full reciprocity over the United States. So let's say you move to Wisconsin and you want to eventually, hunt Wisconsin. Wisconsin will honor Illinois' hunter safety requirement. So the nice thing, it's really a one time thing.
Yeah, and it's good for life. I still have my card from when I was 12 when I got mine
Yep,
in the year 2000. But yeah, I just want to say it is frustrating when you look at that list and there's not as many hunter education courses as you might want. That is all volunteer led, so it's can only go as many as there are volunteers. So as you fall in love with hunting, maybe one day you want to pay back to the community and maybe you can become a hunter education instructor.
absolutely. Good point. And moving right along with another credential that's pretty important. So we live in Illinois, so we are required to have a firearm owner's identification card, regardless of who technically owns the firearm. Any Illinois resident who has it in their hands, in their possession, a firearm or ammunition must have a valid FOID card. These are issued by the Illinois State Police, not the IDNR. You can do the complete application online, and then for 10 years. Now, this is why I really love small game and especially squirrel hunting. So as we move through this talk, you'll realize you don't need a ton of equipment, you don't need a ton of credentials, you don't need, specific permits and things. So in Illinois, all we need to be able to legally hunt squirrels is a base hunting license and then a state habitat stamp, which is $5. And again, the base hunting license, depending if you're a youth, if you're an adult, if you're a veteran, there are different categories of that base license. But you're looking at less than $25, and you are legal to hunt squirrels and other small game in the state. And again, if you're a deer hunter, you've already got all that stuff. If you're an upland hunter, you've already got all that stuff. So it just adds to the pool. Now, I should mention, so Jason and I are very much public land hunters, and so we do pretty much 99% of our hunting on public land. It used to be 100%, but I finally got a decent goose field near us that we occasionally get to go do early Canada goose during the September season hunt. But for squirrels, we're always on public land. And one of the big challenges that we ran into, especially when I first moved to Illinois. So I grew up hunting Missouri, hunting Kentucky, and when I moved to Illinois, I realized that public land is just not as prominent on the landscape as it is in some other states. That's just the nature of Illinois. So, in terms of the total land mass, we're looking at around 2% of the Illinois state land is public. So, that's not a ton. But the Illinois DNR has developed this new website called huntillinois.org. If you haven't spent time on that website yet, I think what is it, Jason? Probably 3 years old now at this point, maybe four.
Yeah, it might be a little older than that because of how time flies anymore. It's probably
Yeah,
about
time is weird. Yeah.
probably 4 years old, my guess. Probably 2021, 2020 was when they were trying to work on it, I know.
That sounds about right. But the nice thing is it's a website that's strictly built for hunting. And so if you've historically gone to the old Illinois DNR website, you may have found it a little cumbersome, a little challenging to navigate and to find whatever you're looking for. This website is literally built just for Illinois hunters. So it's got all the information you ever need. And one of the big things that I highly recommend, especially if you're interested in hunting public land, is checking out the site specific regulations. As you navigate Hunt Illinois and you click on an individual site, it'll pull up the page you see right here on the right. And it will basically tell you exactly what you can do at that site, when you can do it, where you can do it, and how you can do it. And the reason I really emphasize this, especially for squirrel over something like deer, a lot of times for deer, you're just going to see the words statewide regulations apply. And that's kind of all it's going to say. For squirrels, very often you're going to see a little bit more nuanced in terms of the site specific regulation. So a lot of the sites that Jason and I hunt near or hunt on, a lot of them don't allow using a 22 rifle for squirrels. You're only allowed to use shotgun. All that information will be spelled out directly on the site specific regulations on the Hunt Illinois website. So definitely read through that. And one thing I don't necessarily have a picture of, but they also have a new hunt map tool. And so you can see where all the state sites are located in the state. And you can actually click a squirrel icon and it's just going to show you all the properties that. And so it can be really beneficial to, again, just see, okay, this site's near me. blah blah blah, and just start to kind of put those pieces together. But definitely, if you're hunting public land, always check huntillinois.org and check those site specific regs.
Yep, that's my favorite part of the website is one, they give you the phone number usually of the site staffs that we can call if you have any questions, and then two, is that map because before it was just an alphabetized list and you had no idea where the site was at. So now you can look at a map and look at the area that of the state you're trying to get out in and see maybe you'll find a new site that you didn't even know was available to you nearby.
Yep, it's a great feature. Great feature. And again, that transcends just, squirrel too. One thing I really like that mapping tool for, if you're a waterfowl hunter, I know this is a squirrel webinar, but we like to hunt just about everything we can that we can eat. So the waterfowl maps are really nice because it'll show you exactly where like if you're hunting a waterfowl spot, you may have to stay 10 feet from a specific stake.
Yep.
Well, it will show you on the map exactly where that stake is. And so it helps navigate things a lot easier. So when we're talking squirrel hunting in Illinois, we are essentially talking about two species. So there's several different species of squirrels in Illinois, but for hunting purposes, we are only legally allowed to harvest the gray squirrel and the fox squirrel. And so these are the two squirrels that 95% of the time when you see a squirrel out in the wild, the chances are it's going to be one of these two. I'll show you a couple pictures of the other, let's say, protected species and kind of how to identify those. But what I want to emphasize here is just the size difference. So a fox squirrel is going to be much larger than your typical gray squirrel. And your gray squirrels are typically the ones that you're going to see, in your yard. And the fox, you're often going to see them along edges. And so when I say the word edge, essentially what I'm meaning is the intersection between two habitat types, whether it's a forest to prairie, whether it's a mature forest to a shrubland, any place you have those intersecting habitat types, you're going to find edge species, which fox squirrels tend to be. But one thing I really want to emphasize is when I'm hunting squirrels, very often when I see fox squirrels, I'm somewhat near an agricultural area. There's going to be standing corn, standing beans, at least somewhere nearby. Not necessarily the edge that you're hunting, but typically you're going to find fox squirrels a lot more in these ag dominated areas than you would their smaller kind of kinsake, the gray squirrel. Now, I do want to say gray squirrels can certainly have a reddish hue to them. A lot of people, whenever they see a fox squirrel, like here on the right, or a gray squirrel with a little bit of red tint, they'll call that a red squirrel. And I want to emphasize we actually have a species of red squirrel that is not legal to harvest and is protected. Now, this squirrel is very, very small. We're talking 11 to 14 inches, which is even much smaller than the already small gray squirrel here at about 16 to 20 inches. So they're very small, and you're typically going to find them in conifer forests. So these are forests that have cone bearing trees, so pine stands typically. And I put a quick range map just to kind of show geographically where they can be found in the state. Again, they're not super abundant. You're not going to see them all the time, but it is something to keep in mind if you're hunting squirrels in that area and you're just now getting into it. Definitely make sure what you are, shooting at is either a gray squirrel or a fox squirrel.
Yeah,
Now,
those red squirrels are
finding
the size of chipmunks.
yeah, I mean they are very very small.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
and
also Dan, sorry to
during
cut
the
you off,
winter,
buddy.
you will see their ears will actually develop a little bit of a tuft. I didn't put it in this picture just
Oh,
because
cool.
again, you really only see it during those winter months. But it will look like they have kind of an appendage of hair that sticks right on top of their ears.
That's cool. What about black squirrels?
Good question. So we get a lot of questions about black squirrels, about white squirrels, and typically those are just going to be a phenotypic characteristic of a squirrel. So a black squirrel, it usually just means that squirrel is going to have a little bit of more melanin. And so it is technically going to still be a gray squirrel or a fox squirrel, but oh, sorry, I got an email. Someone's having issues. Let me send this link to them really quick just to
Sure.
try to get them
Yeah,
in.
so black squirrels are basically, I believe they're gray squirrels that are melanistic. So there's some, like I've seen that you see it in all animals. There's like I've seen a melanistic garter snake before. It's an all black garter snake. Um, so it's pretty neat that but forever when I was a kid anyway, I always thought they were different species and because they were always in the same areas. Like I'd go up in the Poconos of Pennsylvania and they'd always seem to be more up in the mountains, but it just happened that there was a breeding population of them up there and they're passing that gene around, I guess. So
Exactly. Yep. And so that it is technically not a different species. It's
cool.
just a different characteristic, a different. genetic mutation that presents. And there is some recessive dominance there. And so typically when you're in an area, like we've all probably heard of areas that have an abundance of black squirrels, a lot of times it's going to be, a park or something where that gene has just been allowed to spread and spread and spread. And so you may actually find areas where there's a pocket of just a lot of black squirrels. And I know, Jason, you were actually out, was it last year when you saw the piebald squirrel? Was that last year or the year prior?
That was that was the year prior. I was not turkey. I was deer hunting, and yeah, I saw a piebald. I got a photo of it. Yeah, it was a half like it was white patches on the gray squirrel. It was actually probably a piebald fox squirrel because I only ever see fox squirrels where I hunt at. So it was probably a piebald.
Yeah, I would bet just knowing that area. Yeah.
Yeah,
Awesome. So, yep. So, again, red squirrels are protected, as I mentioned. So, we're really focused on harvesting gray and fox squirrels. The last squirrel I want to mention, you are not likely to see this one because this is a nocturnal species. However, we were hunting. I'm not even going to try to guess when it was, but a few years ago, Jason, myself, and one of our other buddies was out, and we actually happened to see a flying squirrel walking up a tree in the middle of the day. So weird things do happen, but just be cognizant that you may see a flying squirrel like this. They look completely different than your typical grays or fox, but just keep that in mind that those can be out there as well.
that was an archery event at Chain Lake State Park.
Is that where it was?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
we were walking through the archery.
And it was probably like 10 o'clock in the morning. Like, I mean,
Yeah,
just super out of character.
I've also been tracking deer at night with a headlamp on and had one land next to me on a tree, and that was pretty wild.
They are so cool. And again, they're pretty easy to identify. They have a very flattened tail compared to your typical gray or fox squirrel. You can see the gray and fox squirrel have this very bushy like tail, where on the flying squirrel, it's going to be very flat. And then obviously they have a lot of extra skin between their appendages that allow them to essentially glide. All right, so moving right along through regulations, squirrel season dates and limits. We talked about this a little bit when we kind of mentioned what brings us to squirrel hunting. One of the biggest ones is opportunity. Again, you can see the season runs from August 1st to February 15th. So you've got a lot of time to put a lot of squirrels in your freezer, and it can be a lot of fun. What I want to emphasize here is the shooting time. So for squirrels, we are legally allowed to shoot a half hour before sunrise to a half hour after sunset. And so if you're a deer hunter, you know that pretty much lines up just exactly with deer legal shooting hours. The bag limit is five, so that means you can harvest five per day. It does not matter which species, so you could harvest two gray squirrels and three fox squirrels. You could harvest all five of them being fox squirrels. You could harvest all five of them being gray squirrels. It doesn't matter. Just five total per day. And then the possession limit is 10. And so we get a lot of questions about possession limit. And the easiest way to view possession limit is in your freezer. You can have up to 10. At that point, if you have 10 in your freezer, guess what? Go ahead and start eating some of them before you go back out and hunt again. Or you can also gift them to people. So, but you want to have that maximum of 10 in your possession. It's also worth noting that squirrel season does close for just a few short days during the firearm deer season, especially in those counties that are open for firearm deer season. So keep that in mind. And I see we have a question. Can I gift 10 to my wife and store my 10? Absolutely. As long as that individual is a licensed hunter. So you can buy her a hunting license and boom, you can gift her 10. And then now you have 10 and you are perfect and ready to rock. That's the nice thing about having a multi-hunter household is it really does bolster those possession limits up quite a bit. All right, Jason, you want to talk really quickly about some legal method of take here?
Sure. So basically, we've already talked a little bit about it with the 22 question, but you can hunt with shotgun, firearms, and archery equipment. There are special made, I think they're called judo points. And that's right, Dan.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
and so they the way to view a judo point is essentially with a broadhead. If you're familiar with how we hunt deer, turkey, and things with a crossbow, it's got razor blades on it, right? And so it's a cutting surface that we're trying to cut through and basically cut the lungs, the heart. Well, with an arrow made for a small game, you're typically going to be using what we call a judo point, or there's some other different fancy names and different makes,
Yeah.
but essentially it's a blunt tip. So instead of it penetrating and cutting and slicing through those organs, you're essentially just trying to kill with blunt force. And so it's just a big, sometimes you'll see a red stop, a big rubber stop on the end. I prefer a judo point because it's got little appendages that will actually allow that arrow to grab itself in the grass. And so if you're an archer and you've ever missed your target, you know how quick those arrows can bury in the dirt and how quick it is to lose arrows. The judo point just kind of makes that impossible, right? And so it essentially will just grab onto any grass or vegetation and keep that arrow from penetrating in the ground should you miss the target.
Yeah, and I had a buddy who would hunt with a traditional bow for archery season, and he would have one of the arrows in his quiver would have a blunt tip on it, and so if a squirrel ever got within range, because he was hunting very close range, because he was good enough shot to hunt, but not good enough shot to shoot too far.
Yeah.
But so he's like, yeah, if a squirrel ever comes over here, I'm going to shoot it, and it was really fun
I'm
to
going to
see.
stop you real quick, Jason, just because we had a couple more questions on
Yep.
the bag limit and stuff, and
Oh, sure,
just before we get too far away from that slide.
go for it.
Ooh, ooh, ooh. Okay. So basically, so we had a question. So technically, you can hunt more than 10 squirrels. So the way the easiest way to view it is you can harvest up to 5 squirrels per day. That is the most you can harvest. If you go out in the morning and harvest 5 squirrels, you cannot go hunt that evening and go harvest more squirrels. You can only harvest 5 per day. You can have 10 in your possession. So that means 10 in your freezer stored. Once you consume those 10, then you can start harvesting squirrels again. So there's not a limit to how many squirrels you can harvest in a year or anything like that. It's just that daily limit and then that possession limit. So those are really the only two things to keep in mind. And again, possession limit does count per licensed hunter in your household. So in my household, it's my wife and I, we're both avid hunters. So our possession limit bumps up to, double what this number is, but we can only gift them to licensed hunters, right? So you can gift wild game to non-hunters, or to non-licensed hunters. The only caveat there is if you're going to say that's part of your possession limit, then they need to be a licensed hunter. But I've given plenty of venison, plenty of water. Now there are some things about waterfowl that you'll need to write on the package to make it legal. But yes, you can gift it to people who are non-licensed hunters. Just again, if you're keeping it in your household and saying, "Hey, that's part of my possession limit," definitely make sure you have that other license holder in your household. All right, take it away, Jason. I think I answered all the questions.
Sure. So yeah, so there's a broad range of shotguns that you can use in different styles, but traditionally, I mean, most common are going to be 12 gauge to 20 gauge, but you can also legally use a 410 and a 28 gauge as well. And there are some sites and some regulations for air guns as well, so like a BB gun or something like that. But it has to have certain velocities and things like that to be
Yeah,
legal.
definitely read through the digest on
Yeah.
that because it does change a little bit. I mean, the technology behind air guns these days is absurd, and so they pack a lot of energy, but there are minimum requirements that your air gun needs to match a certain speed before it can be legal to use.
Yeah, and then barrel length and things like that. Um, Yeah. So we had some questions, Dan, about using a 22 and the safety of it, given that cartridge can go once you fire it, the bullet can go quite far.
Absolutely.
What are some things that you do to try to stay safe when you're out hunting?
Yep, that's a great question. And for me, I'll kind of give my philosophy on why when I will use a 22 versus a shotgun. And obviously, like we mentioned, some sites require you to use a shotgun. So sometimes it's kind of out of your hands, but there are other times like we were out, if I was out today or last week when we were out, there are so many leaves on the trees still that this time of year I actually do prefer my shotgun. Even though a 22 is a lot more fun. I'm usually going to get a greater meat yield out of that harvest because I'm not having to pick a bunch of BBs out of the carcass of a squirrel, rather
Mm.
than just a nice headshot that just takes out an edible part of that harvest. Um, so a lot of it depends on that. But for me, when I'm using a 22, and again, everybody has a different rule of thumb, I am very overly cautious, I would say. And so again, a lot of this it comes down to your own personal ethics, but I'll give how I operate when I'm hunting with a 22 for squirrels. I'm only going to shoot a squirrel if it's on the ground or if it's in a tree where I still have a dirt behind it, whether I'm at the base of a ridge and I can see plenty of dirt behind it. Personally, if I see blue sky behind that squirrel, I will not take that shot with a 22. There are people that will do it. There are people that think it's completely safe in it. There's some safety concerns there. I'll definitely say that 22 bullets can go a long way and they can still carry quite a bit of energy. But again, personally for me, I will only take a shot at a squirrel with a 22 if I do not see blue sky beneath around it, right? And so usually it's going to have either some dirt or it's going to be low enough on the tree that I'm shooting into the ground, that type of thing. And that does change the way I hunt too, right? And so a lot of times if I'm hunting with a 22, when I set myself and I pick my spot, and we'll get into a little bit later on about how we kind of pick a spot, but when I set my spot, I know that, right? And so I'm not going to sit at at the top of a ridge where all I can do is shoot up into the sky. I'm going to position myself to where I have multiple areas I can shoot that fit within my own reasonable shot selection. Because again, this is one thing I tell a lot of people: when you pull that trigger, you own that bullet. That bullet is yours. Whatever happens after you pull the trigger, you are entirely responsible for it. And so, for me, I prefer to err on the side of caution, and it certainly has not impacted my ability to harvest squirrels. There are certain times where I go, "Oh man, if I had my shotgun, I could certainly shoot that one today." But I'm just going to sit here, and oftentimes squirrels they move a lot. And so if you now this time of year it's a little bit different as we'll get into behavior and stuff. They're very much in the tops of trees, which is why I said last week or this week I would be taking a shotgun out. But as you transition through fall and winter, you're going to see a lot more activity on the ground. And for me, that's when I prefer a 22 is when they are in their very heavy caching phase. And I just want to show this quick video. This is basically caching, and so this is when squirrels find nuts, and they're just starting to basically pile them up. And if we have any deer hunters in here, you've seen this from your deer stand. This is when squirrels are just running around the ground 24/7 during the basically late October through December. That's when I prefer to use a 22 when I have shots basically just like this video you're looking at, where I have a great backstop. Nothing, that bullet's not going anywhere if I happen to miss that target.
Yeah, and then also right now because you're not seeing them from long ways off. So another reason why you want to use a shotgun now is because the ones you might see, you might scare, and they'll be running. You'll be taking running shots with the shotgun at squirrels as well, or it'll be
Yeah,
or
they'll be running from tree to tree just like
yeah.
this guy. So you can see this is a video that we just took last week. This is a pretty common occurrence this time of year. That is not a shot I would personally take with a 22. Again, there are hunters that do that. I'm not saying they're wrong. Personal decision, I would not. With a shotgun, shotguns are designed to be shot in the air, so that's a completely safe and ethical shot. And what I will say, if you are hunting squirrels with a shotgun, we want to go for headshots. Now, again, obviously with a shotgun, that's a lot more challenging than a single projectile like a 22. You're going to have pellets going in different areas, but you can definitely minimize your total meat yield by aiming towards the head as much as you can.
Hmm. Yeah, no doubt. And then it's also you can go out with one of each, which I prefer honestly. Is you have if there's you go out with a friend and then one of you has a 22 and the other one has a shotgun, then you're prepared for anything. And then we can also talk about tactics on having multiple people too is helpful. Um,
Yeah, squirrel hunting is one of the, and as you even mentioned when we first kicked off that
mhm.
this kind of social aspect of squirrel hunting. And that's one thing I love about. I can probably count on my hand the times that I've gone out squirrel hunting alone. Usually it's with a buddy, with a friend, with a wife, with somebody. It's just to me, squirrel hunting works very well in pairs. And that's a perfect example. One person carry a 22, one person carry a shotgun, and then you cover the kind of the boast of Beth, the both of best worlds. Ooh, that's a tongue twister. So I hope that answered your question, Chris. But that's really what I'm focused on. Again, I don't want to see any blue sky around that target when I'm using a 22. I want to make sure it's completely either on the ground or on a slope or low enough on a tree that I still have ground behind it.
Yep. And there are some old school guns that are 410 22 combos.
Yeah, what do they call them? The old trapper guns, I think.
Yeah, that would be a fun squirrel gun to have.
And I tell you what, just since we're talking about shotgun and you mentioned 410, I have an old single shot 410. I love that thing for squirrel hunting. Absolutely love it. It's super lightweight. It's a single shot. And normally at squirrels, you're taking one shot. And I just love how small, compact it is. And also, it protects a lot more meat. If I'm out there with my 12
Hmm.
gauge, I shoot a squirrel that happens to be very close. There, I'm basically turning that thing into ground squirrel. And so my 410, I can very much concentrate a lot of that shot damage to the head and preserve as much of that meat yield as possible. Oh, cool, Chris.
That's
Got first
awesome.
two squirrels today. I love that. That's a good day.
Cool.
All right. So, since we're talking shotguns, one regulation that is extremely important to know, and this transcends squirrel hunting, this applies to all hunting with a shotgun. Your shotgun must only be capable of holding 3 shells. Now, what that means is you don't just have 3 shells in there, it means you literally cannot put more than 3 in there. And when you go to purchase a shotgun, typically, I'll go back to a nice picture that shows it just so I can illustrate this point a little bit better. But the magazine tube is a lot larger than those 3 shells. And so if you look here at this autoloader, Jason, is it showing my cursor?
Yes.
So this portion of the shotgun where it's basically your forearm, this is essentially the magazine tube. And so you're going to be able to load different shells in this magazine tube. And as you can see, typically you can load 4 to 5, depending on the shotgun. Everyone's a little bit different in this magazine tube. Essentially, that would be a violation. You could not legally hunt with that shotgun. So what you are required to do is install a plug. I have never purchased a shotgun that did not come with a plug in the box. It's literally just a piece of plastic that you drop into this magazine tube that just takes up space. All it does is take up that space so that you cannot put more shells in that shotgun. If you're out hunting with a shotgun and you interact with a conservation officer, literally the first thing he's going to ask to do is to see your shotgun, and he's going to check to ensure you have a plug in it. And so that plug, again, just takes up space. So you can have 2 shells in the magazine tube and 1 in the chamber, totaling 3 shells at most.
And that rule applies for all species except for snow goose hunting in
Yep,
winter.
except for the conservation order season on snow goose.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
So basically, just have your plug in your gun always.
Just leave it in. And
Yeah.
I do recommend if you're brand new to shotguns, um, I emphasize this a lot of my wing shooting clinics too. Please read through the firearm manual when you buy your shotgun. I know we all buy stuff and they all come with manuals, and the manual always gets thrown away within like a matter of seconds. For firearms, it's pretty darn important. One, it'll show you how to install a plug if necessary. But two, it'll show you all the intricacies of that specific firearm, what to clean, how to disassemble it, and make sure you're cleaning all the specific parts that model definitely needs to have cleaned. So just something I like to throw out there. Please read through your firearm manual that comes with your firearm.
Yeah, I had to make a plug the other year because I got my 20 gauge I used when I was since I was a kid. I got it from Pennsylvania finally. I brought it out here, and for some reason it didn't have a plug in it. And I actually looked it up online. I used the plastic hanger and I cut it to length, which is about 9 inches. And so that way it's plastic, it won't rust or anything. It's not made out
There
of
you
metal
go.
or anything. So and then I sanded the edges so that way it wouldn't have any flakes inside of it and cleaned it off and everything else. But you can fashion them if you don't have one, or if you find an old gun that doesn't have one with it and they don't make it anymore, something, I don't know. But you to take it out and
Yeah,
make it,
literally,
you gotta have a
it's
plug in
just
there.
something that takes up space.
Yeah.
Yep. But this is why I really love squirrel hunting. Obviously, we talked about all the other benefits of it, but man, I get tired of carrying all my deer hunting stuff. We just had a big goose hunt that we went on the last week where we did an early season goose hunt. And man, I got tired carrying all that gear out to the field. And so some days it's really nice to just have this minimalist approach where I'm just going out literally with my camo, my firearm, and maybe a butt cushion or a chair if I'm feeling froggy. And that's really it. That's why I love squirrel hunting so much. Hunting these days has really turned into something that you really have to start to plan to do. To me, squirrel hunting is still one of those things that I can just spur of the moment say, "Hey, I'm going to go squirrel hunting," and I can literally get dressed, grab my shotgun, grab my licenses, and be out the door in 5 minutes. Where
Yeah.
deer hunting, I have to get everything together, get my harness, get my tree stand, make sure all this other nuanced stuff that it's very easy to go. You know what? I'm not going to hunt today. I don't feel like dealing with it. With squirrel, put on your clothes, go. It's
Hmm.
awesome. I do want to mention we are not required to wear blaze orange while squirrel hunting. Now, this is a personal safety thing I've mentioned before. I like to err on the side of caution. I will bring some blaze orange. I'm not wearing it the whole time I'm hunting. Normally just a blaze orange hat. And while I'm up moving around on public land, I like to just throw that on. All it does is just give me that peace of mind that people can see me from a ways off. It just gives me a little bit more personal comfort. But you do not need to legally wear blaze orange while you're out squirrel hunting. Now, we do get a lot of questions. Hey, if I'm out squirrel hunting, with my shotgun and I have all the right credentials and I happen to see some rabbits, can I harvest those rabbits too? That's where you need to pay a little more attention because for rabbits, you do have to wear blazed orange. So in that scenario, you could not shoot those rabbits unless you happen to be wearing the full blaze orange that's required for rabbit hunting.
Hmm. Yeah, I think the thing the safety is that you're shooting up mo majority of the time for squirrels versus always on the ground for rabbits, and then
Exactly.
yeah,
Yep. Yep.
and then also the strategy of hunting rabbits of people walking around and kicking brush and people being mixed in with each other, and
Yeah. And 6 foot prairie grasses. And
yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
Dan, real quick question, another safety shot question. If a squirrel is treed by a dog, should I look for an angle where there is a tree trunk behind it to shoot it with a bow and arrow? I assume it is more dangerous to shoot arrow when there are no background behind the target. That's
That's
a
a good question.
yeah.
Ideally, yes. And a lot of it really depends. I hate saying this because it's a very nuanced question. It's a great question, but it is a little nuanced.
Hmm.
Jason, can you pull up a quick judo point picture real quick just so we can illustrate that?
Yeah, I can throw it in the chat probably.
That would be great.
Let's go
Just so
do that.
you have an idea of what I'm kind of talking about here. When I'm squirrel hunting, I am never using a typical arrow point, whether it's the field tip that you use to shoot at targets or a broadhead that you're using at a big game like deer, elk, turkey, those things that have that giant cutting surface. I'm using what we call either a judo point or a blunt tip that essentially doesn't have any penetrating power. All it's doing is killing by concussion. And so in a scenario like that, these arrows are actually designed where they don't go as fast because it's a heavier tip, right? Where force, mass times velocity, all that physics stuff. If you can think back to high school or collegiate physics, we want a heavy arrow that just hits hard for small game. And so it's not as big of a concern as you're thinking of. But again, I still err on the side of caution and I do want to backstop, but it's not necessarily for the safety. It's more so that I can retrieve that arrow if I miss. Arrows get pretty expensive over time, and so I want to make sure when I'm shooting that target, that or shooting that arrow, that I can recover that arrow. And so Jason just dropped a few examples in the chat. The style that I have had good success with are these two here on the left. And so you can see those appendages that I kind of mentioned earlier that basically grab onto vegetation that don't allow that arrow to penetrate the ground, and it just kind of grabs on the grass and it'll basically force that arrow to stand up. And typically when I'm archery hunting for squirrels, a lot of times I treat it a lot like a 22 where I'm primarily shooting on the ground. And now I will say I don't do a ton of squirrel hunting where I go out with a bow. A lot of times it's opportunistic, kind of like when I'm, archery hunting for deer and I happen to have a fall archery turkey tag in my pocket. And if a fall turkey happens to walk by in range, then I can take that shot. I'm kind of the same way with squirrels with archery in the case that I'll have what I have denoted as squirrel arrows in my quiver. And so if I'm having a very bad day and I'm just bored and squirrels are all over the place on the ground, I can grab one of my squirrel arrows and take that shot. So keep that in mind. But again, I prefer shooting down into the ground with arrows, but you can shoot in the air. And if Jason, if you could pull up a picture of a flu arrow as well whenever you get a
Sure.
chance.
Yeah, and then
And
here's
so,
another one that doesn't have any blades on it at all, and it's basically a rubber stopper at the end of the
yep,
arrow.
exactly.
Yeah, and you can use like these can fit on crossbow bolts as well if you have a crossbow. So yeah, it's really nice, especially like if you're in areas like say you only have 10 acres, if or if you have a friend who has land, or if you're somewhere and you don't want to freak the neighbors out by shooting guns off. This is a good quiet way to still uh archery
Yep,
hunt and squirrel hunt and small game hunt on a small lot, possibly. As long as
absolutely. Now that
you're
does not mean
following.
in your suburban neighborhood, just
No,
to
as long as
clarify.
you're following. I was gonna follow it up by saying you need to be in areas that you're allowed to hunt, and also
There you
keep
go.
it
Yeah,
far
your
enough away
HOA may not like that.
from homes that way you're safe. Yada yada yada. Anyway,
But yeah, so these are great for that. And as he pulls up the flu arrow, I'll kind of give a little background into what a flu arrow is. And so if you're used to seeing arrows, you're used to seeing, especially the modern arrows that have a very small fletching on the end. So they don't have a ton. You can think of it as the old feathers that you used to see. On modern arrows, they're very thin, they're very slender, and they're very small and lightweight. On a flu arrow, they're much bigger, they're longer, and they actually have some twist to it. And the flu arrows are essentially designed to be shot in the air. And so if you've ever seen anybody, try to pheasant hunt, to waterfowl hunt, to quail hunt with archery equipment, they are typically using a flu arrow that is again designed to shoot in the air that basically slows down after it hits a certain distance. And so it's kind of like a shotgun in that it's designed to be shot in the air. It doesn't have a ton of velocity where that shot is just going to continue going on and still have, you know, enough kinetic energy to cause damage. So if you are interested in focusing on archery hunting for squirrels, I would look into getting a flu arrow and using those judo points that Jason kind of dropped in the chat in the first couple messages there. But these flu arrows are great, and again, they're designed to be shot at moving targets in the air in a safe manner.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if you shoot a crossbow in the air at, at 45 degrees, that arrow is if you miss and it just continues, that's going to go quite a good distance. I
Yeah, yeah. Don't
and
do it with a crossbow.
yeah,
Right, right.
and even compound bow too. But I mean, not, yeah, basically, yeah, shooting off ridges down into the bottoms of a bottom and having a backstop is definitely key. And
Yep.
the
And then if you
flu
want to,
arrows.
and you can have multiple arrows too, depending on your setup. If you're shooting, you know, a traditional bow, a recurve, or a longbow, you can have a couple flu arrows that, hey, if that thing's up in the air and I want to try to shoot one, you know, out of the top of a tree, I have the gear for that. If it's on the ground, I have the gear for that. So.
Yep.
All right, moving right along to squirrel behavior. And this is something I think a lot of hunters don't necessarily give credit to, but squirrels are quite fascinating creatures. And I kind of mentioned early on in this discussion that they're very much like a Midwestern elk hunt where you get to do the spot and stalk approach. And that's pretty accurate. And a couple reasons why. One of the biggest reasons I like squirrel hunting, and Jason really hit it when he was kind of opening up the conversation, is you get to see the changes in the seasonal behavior of squirrels. Again, this season runs from August 5th to mid-February. So you're getting, you know, late summer through the entirety of fall, and you're starting to get into winter behavior, and it's all different. And so that it's going to make your hunting strategies quite a bit different. Now, in early season, I would still consider us pretty much in early season right now. They're very much keyed in on the tops of trees. So we were out last weekend, well, whatever, within the last week or two, out squirrel hunting. I did not see a single squirrel on the ground. They were all on the tops of trees, and that's just what they do during that time of year. Now, as we transition more into fall and the acorns start dropping, you're going to start then seeing them shift to a caching behavior, which is basically just storing nuts for that winter. And so that's my favorite time to hunt. And you can ask a million squirrel hunters. Everyone's going to have a different preference. I know one of our colleagues, Curtis, his favorite time to squirrel hunt is basically last week through this week. He loves when they're keying in on hickory trees, which we'll talk about in a second. But I actually prefer this time of year when they're caching. They're a lot more active on the ground, and I just like being in the woods in the fall a little bit more. But you also get some of their breeding season. And so it's very much like a little miniature rut. If we have deer hunters here, you've probably been in your deer stand and heard what sounded like a herd of buffalo running through the woods, only to find out it's just two squirrels chasing each other because they're getting ready to breed. And so that's when I personally like squirrel hunting. I find them to be very active. But again, that's what's cool about squirrels. You get to hunt all these different seasons. A couple things that I'm always watching for, especially in the early season, is barking and tail flick. So I'm going to shut up, and you should be able to hear this squirrel barking. It's not very loud, but and so they use barking. It's a communication tool, right? And so it can be an alert, it can be avoiding predators, it can be a lot of these different things. But when it's very beneficial for hunters, is a lot of times it means they spotted you or they spotted something that they're not necessarily certain of. And we had a question about hunting squirrels with dogs a little bit ago. This is where dogs really key in on. And so a squirrel dog is basically trained to locate a squirrel, run that squirrel up the tree, and force that squirrel to do exactly what this squirrel is doing. Just sit at the tree, bark down at the dog, and tail flick and tail flick and tail flick. And they'll do that for 5, 10 minutes until you happen to walk up and take time and get your shot. And so what I'm often listening for when I'm out in the woods is this barking. Not only are they barking at us, you know, and other things they see, but they're also barking to communicate between each other. But pay attention to these tail flicks too. That's usually the first bit of movement that I pick up on is that tail flick. And so there's a couple schools of thought on why they tail flick. Again, it's similar to the bark, but what it really is used for, and a lot of the research has kind of highlighted this, is that it's a predator distraction. And so let's say there's an avian predator like a hawk or an eagle, and it's trying to attack that squirrel. Well, if that squirrel is tail flicking, that's probably what the predator is going to attack, which is going to keep the important parts of that animal, its head, its heart, its lungs, fairly safe. But the tail flick gives a lot of squirrels away. So definitely focus in on looking for that tail flick up in the tops of trees. And when I'm looking for areas to squirrel hunt, one of the most common pieces of sign that I'm looking for are drays. And so these are here at the bottom. I'll transition. We've got a couple better pictures of drays here in a second that show them a little closer. These are essentially nests for squirrels. So squirrels are by and large cavity nesters. So they will nest in trees that are hollowed out, have holes. However, if you're in an area in Illinois, just we've a lot of Illinois has been historically logged, so we don't have this old growth mature timber that really does create a lot of natural cavities that you may see in other parts of the country. And so a lot of times I'm focused on these drays because these are what the squirrels are going to build as their nest if cavities are not available in that area. And again, there's not a lot of cavities in Illinois, and so a lot of times I'm keying in on these drays. And when I'm keying in on drays, it's not necessarily just going, oh, there's one. Usually, when I'm getting in an area that looks productive, I'm going to be able to see 4 to 6 drays from my individual location. And I will say they are a lot easier to spot in the fall than right now. They're pretty hard to spot this time of year, just again because so many leaves are on the trees. But those drays are what I'm looking for, as well as the squirrel food sources. And so we talked about a few of these a second ago. I'll start off with hickory nuts. So that happens to be the second column of pictures here. That's really what they're keyed in on late August, early September. They're starting to transition away from them. But if you actually watch this video closely, we took last week, and you may not be able to see it, just the nature of Zoom, but he's up there chewing a hickory nut, and it actually looks like it's raining down hickory nut particles. As you can see, they fall. And so he's just up there feeding and feeding and feeding on these hickory nuts. And this is what the ground often looks like, just covered in little hickory nut particles all over the ground. When I see areas like that in late August, early September, those are the areas that I'm keying in on. You can just see all these little bits and particles of hickory nuts. And there are several different hickory tree species in Illinois. The most common and the easiest to identify for 95% of us is a shagbark hickory. And so this picture right here, as well as at the end of this video, this is a shagbark hickory. And so if you ever see a tree that looks like this, where that bark is like peeling off of itself, and chances are it's a shagbark hickory. Usually, when you find one hickory, you're going to find an entire hickory stand. So keep that in mind. This is what I'm keying in on. And obviously, you can look up at the leaves and see if you happen to see hickory nuts on that tree to confirm if it's a hickory tree. But 99 times out of 100, you're also going to see hickory nuts all over the ground beneath that tree. So those are the things I'm really looking for in kind of this late August, early September, is finding drays, because that shows me that squirrels are historically using that area. And then hickory nuts showing, hey, they're in here right now feeding actively. As we transition through fall, you're going to start to see a shift, and it's already naturally occurring. I happen to have a big black walnut above my house, and the squirrels in the past like week and a half have moved off the hickory trees and started to move towards those black walnuts. And I actually woke up at about 6:15 this morning to what sounded like Santa Claus on my roof. Turns out it was just a squirrel up in the tree dropping some big black walnuts onto my roof. So they are definitely starting that transition over to black walnuts, which will last a couple weeks at most. And then as we hit October, they're really going to start to switch to acorns. And that's, again, my favorite time to hunt is when they're keyed in on those acorns. And what I want to emphasize now, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of different oak species in Illinois. But what I want to emphasize is there's basically two groups. And as a hunter, that's all I really care about. I don't necessarily care. Is it a shingle oak? Is it a pin oak? Is it an overcup oak? That may be interesting to know, but for hunting purposes, is it a red oak or a white oak? And so we have these two groups of oaks. The white oak is 100% the preferred acorn by almost all wildlife species. It's a more palatable acorn because it's got a much lower amount of tannic acid, so it's not as bitter. Um, So again, it is the preferred acorn. It's the one they're going to key in on first. However, since it doesn't have that tannic acid content, they also rot on the ground quite quickly. And so that white oak phase is only going to last for a few weeks before they switch over to the red oaks. And if you've taken any of my deer talks or deer webinars or deer clinics, I talk about the exact same thing because it's just as important for deer as you'll naturally see. You'll be sitting in a spot and oh my gosh, there's deer everywhere. And then the next day, there's none. You're like, what happened? They very well may have switched from feeding on dominantly white oaks to those red oaks. So keep that in mind. How do you tell the difference? Luckily, the leaves make it pretty easy. So if you ever see an oak leaf that has these bristle tips, where it looks like a little hair-like appendage sticking off the lobe, that is going to be a red oak. If it has these rounded lobes, notice there's no bristle tip, it has these nice rounded lobes, that is going to be a white oak species. So those are the two easiest to keep in mind. One thing I also want to emphasize is this number one column here. 2 year acorn maturation versus the 1 year. And again, obviously the white oak is the preferred, but there are instances where you may not have a good white oak acorn crop for a specific year, whether you have drought conditions or maybe you have too much water at a certain point where that growing season was just impacted. The red oaks, it takes 2 years for an individual acorn to mature. Where on a white oak, it only takes 1 year. So drought conditions or weather conditions can really impact the white oak crop, where you still have that buffer of the red oak crop behind it. So if you have, really bad years of drought during that growing season, you may want to start focusing more on areas that have more abundance of red oaks versus those white oaks. I kind of pretty much went through all of this already. One thing that I haven't keyed in on, and I know Jason, this is something he looks for every time he's out squirrel hunting, so maybe he can chime in here. But horizontal logs, I call them kind of laydowns, but I swear every laydown I see in an area that has active squirrels, active drays, are always going to have like a pile of nut particles on top of that horizontal laydown, as squirrels are just using that as kind of
Yep.
a pathway as well as a little food spot.
Yeah, or stumps. Yeah, one of my favorite shots I ever had was a squirrel off a stump because it was almost like it was fake. It was almost like it was staged almost. So I was like, holy cow. But yeah, I mean it's really easy to spot them first because there's not a lot of leaf litter all over the place. So it's easy to look at the stumps and see all the nuts and things on the stumps and say, oh, they're around.
Yep. And normally, like I said, with the 22, that's the kind of areas I'm looking for. Again, I want to have good food sources. So I want to be in an oak hickory forest that's got some drays present. And then I'm going to try to find some areas where I can sit relatively above, maybe on the side of a slope, look down and have some horizontal logs beneath me that have evidence of squirrels, running on them or like Jason said, sitting there feeding. And those are the shots I prefer. And so we've kind of touched on this here and there throughout, but we'll just kind of give a quick rundown. There's several different ways to squirrel hunt. This is my preferred way. It's basically deer hunting. And so any deer hunter knows you sit there for long enough in your deer stand, you're going to see a bunch of squirrels. Well, that's kind of by design. So squirrels, when you're out there in the woods and you disturb them, it usually takes them about 20 to 30, sometimes 45 minutes before they kind of relax, the woods go back to sleep, and everything kind of calms down from that disturbance that you created walking through there. And so for me, if I really want to try to have a productive squirrel hunt, I'm going to do it just like a deer hunt. I'm going to try to get there right at, a little bit before it starts to get legal light so I can get set up and get in an area. And squirrels are crepuscular, just like deer and a lot of our other game species. And what I mean by crepuscular is we have this term nocturnal, which means active during night. We have diurnal, which is active during the daylight. And then we have this term crepuscular, which is essentially active during the twilight hours. So whether it's dawn or dusk. And so I prefer, if you can swing it, hunt squirrels early or hunt squirrels late. You're going to have the most active opportunities during those periods. And a lot of times, again, I'm getting in these areas and I'm just going to sit there for 30, 45 minutes listening for squirrels barking, looking for those tree flicks, listening for squirrels chewing, which means they're just sitting there cutting on a hickory nut or an acorn. You can actually hear it literally sounds like something's just up there nibbling away at something. I'm always listening for that. And one thing that I think gives more squirrels away than just about anything is them dropping nuts and twigs to the forest floor. Now, obviously, if you have a big acorn crop, there's going to be acorns just dropping all the time. But if you're sitting there and all of a sudden it just starts, oh, acorn, 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 and it stops, chances are there's probably a squirrel running up there somewhere knocking some of those loose. So definitely pay attention to that. One caveat, if it's a super windy day, I'm usually going to go back to bed. Squirrels, like most game species, don't have the best eyesight, but what their eyesight is good at is detecting movement. And so their primary predator detection avoidance strategy is to be able to visualize movement, to see movement. And just imagine on a windy day where everything around them is moving, it's very hard to pick up on those minute movements that may be a predator stalking them, right? And so for them on a super windy day, you're not going to see the activity that you may anticipate. And so a lot of times on a windy day, I'm just going to go back to bed. Now, if it's a day where it's like, okay, well, this is kind of my last day to hunt, or I don't have the option, I only have a few days to hunt, try to find what I call leeward sides or bottoms. So areas that are protected from the wind. Maybe you have a west wind and you can get on the side of on the east side of a slope where there's really not a ton of wind hitting that section of forest. You may still see a little bit of activity in areas like that. If it's super windy, you may want to try to get in the bottoms where again it's a little bit more wind protected. So wind doesn't necessarily mean your squirrel hunt's over, but it certainly does make it a little bit more challenging. And that's why I really like to focus on the first 2 hours of the day. Obviously, they're crepuscular, that's when they're most active, but also that's before the winds really start to pick up. As the surface of the earth heats up, those winds get a little bit stronger and a little more dominant, where early in the morning, they're not too bad. Now, I say that wind can be advantageous if you're interested in the mobile hunting, the stalking, where you're constantly kind of walking around. The wind can really help you conceal some of your movements. Now, again, I'm not going to be doing this up on a ridge where the wind's, 30 miles an hour just blowing everything. But if you can get into those wind protected areas, get into the bottoms, you can use some of that wind to help conceal the noise from you walking around as well as your movement. Now, if you are taking this approach, I highly recommend utilizing a shotgun, especially for your first few hunts, unless you're really good at stalking through the woods, because chances are the vast majority of squirrels you see using this strategy are going to be running away from you on the ground. So it can be advantageous to have a shotgun just because those are, again, designed to shoot at moving targets. It's a little bit simpler than a 22 maybe for something like that. And I also want to emphasize never shoot into a dray or into a tree cavity to scare the squirrel out. And there's been plenty of times where I have passed on a squirrel where I'll be sitting there. I'll go back to a picture just because it illustrates it really quite well. You will see this a lot where a squirrel is just sitting there in its hole and just kind of looking out. Don't take that shot. All you're going to do is probably kill that animal, but you're never going to recover that carcass. It's going to be locked in that tree. It's just going to rot. It's going to waste. Don't take that shot. Let that squirrel come out. And if it doesn't, there's plenty of other squirrels out there. So I always like to emphasize that we don't want to shoot at a dray like these two pictures here illustrate. We don't want to just take a random shot up there. And also don't shoot a squirrel that isn't completely out of that cavity. Now, I did mention squirrel hunting can be productive with a dog. It does take a little bit of a highly trained dog. Now, I had the benefit of getting to do this when I was in Kentucky, and I forget the gentleman's name, but if you've ever watched Meat Eater, he actually did an episode with Meat Eater where they went out and took him squirrel hunting with his dogs. I hunted with that gentleman once, and it was the most fun I've ever had squirrel hunting. However, I don't have the time nor the resources to develop a perfectly trained squirrel dog. But essentially, what they're doing, it's very similar to a raccoon dog. They're trying to tree that squirrel, and that squirrel's going to sit up on a limb and basically just bark down at the dogs. And then hopefully, you as the hunter then sneak up, take your shot, and then retrieve the animal. Can be a lot of fun, but again, it does take a highly specialized dog. Now, that's not to say I have a golden retriever that has become my squirrel dog, but I don't take her out to tree squirrels. What she's really good at is retrieving them. So she basically just acts like, when she's out duck hunting or pheasant hunting, she's just out there retrieving the carcass for me, bringing it back, making sure it's dead, that kind of thing.
Is that Kevin Murphy, Dan?
Kevin Murphy, that's his name. Yeah, yeah. Kevin Murphy down in Kentucky. Yep, you
Yep.
got it. So this is a little quick video just to show the processing aspect of squirrel hunting. And one thing I want to emphasize, you can't really mess up. And so we get a lot of questions and a lot of, and I get it naturally. I was that way when I first started hunting, where, oh, the field dressing, the processing, it sounds so difficult, so intimidating. In reality, as long as you're getting the meat off of that carcass, now you may not get the prettiest looking steak like you'd get at, the steakhouse in downtown Chicago that costs like $250. But hey, if you're getting the meat off the critter, you're going to do okay. But this method that we're showing here is called the midsection method. So there's several different methods. Every squirrel hunter you ask is going to have a different way. This is the way I have found to be the quickest, the easiest. And again, I know a million people are probably going to disagree with me, especially for a new hunter. It's quite simple. And so all we're doing is basically creating and cutting an entire girdle around this midsection. And so we're just cutting through the skin. You can see his stomach is still completely intact. We haven't punctured that stomach. So the intestines, the stomach, all those internal organs are still contained. And we're essentially just cutting the skin. So we're going to do basically a full circle around the midsection. And then we're just going to start working that skin down and basically pulling it off like a sock, both on the feet and on the top portion of the squirrel. And one thing I do want to mention as you're doing this now in this example, this is our buddy Adam. He did not wear gloves. I personally like to wear gloves, not necessarily to it just makes the cleanup process that much simpler. But again, you can see he's basically just working that skin around the front legs, around the head, and just slowly pulling it off. I will say this process is quick and easier the quicker you do it after a harvest. As that critter is still warm, it's going to be a lot easier to get that skin off. If you let that skin sit on for 3 to 4 hours before you begin processing, it's going to be a lot more difficult to get that skin off. So as you can see, he's just slowly working that skin around the front shoulder. And then, as you can see over in that video, Curtis is just slowly cutting around the neck, and he's going to remove the head, which will still have the full skin attached to it. And I like to personally bring a pair of game shears like Adam has right here in this picture. It makes cutting through the bones much easier, especially when you get to the portion where he's about to get at now, where you're going to cut the feet off. And so you'll just lop the feet off, and then at the end,
On
you
the back.
basically end up with a couple quarters of squirrel. So you're going to have your two back legs, your back, your front legs, and then this is another portion of the back. So it's a pretty simple process. We do have this video on our YouTube channel where we actually talk over it. It's a little slower, so feel free to watch that video if you want a refresher. But again, there's a million different ways to process squirrel. This just happens to be the way I happen to do it.
And it is legal to do that at the truck as long as you take, I'd have a garbage bag with me to take separate the meat from the fur, and then you can have a cooler there to put all that in a cooler.
Yep, that's a really good point. That's one thing we've started pushing really heavily, and I forget who brought the idea to it. I think it was Chuck Stites, the deer processors there that we filmed several videos with on our channel, which are really good. He goes through the entire process of processing a deer, the equipment, all that kind of stuff. But he said one thing one day that really stuck to Jason and I, and it was basically, so many hunters prepare for the hunt. We go out and scout. We spend time trying to read and understand and learn all these different strategies and techniques, but oftentimes we don't prepare for the harvest enough. And so that's one thing I want to emphasize, especially with squirrel, because a lot of people, oh yeah, I'll just go out and shoot some squirrels. If you treat squirrel meat with the care that it deserves, I promise you will not regret eating squirrel. It is delicious. And so prepare for the harvest. So, like Jason said, make sure you're bringing a clean and sharp knife. Bring a trash bag to put those other bits in. Bring, Ziploc bags to throw your cleaned portions of meat in. I always have a couple extra big bottles of water in my cooler when I go out hunting, so I can quickly rinse off meat and just get all that extra blood, all that extra hair off as much as possible. So give it the care that it deserves. And I mention hair because this is one reason why a lot of people, well, not a lot of people, but why some hunters do not like this strategy of processing is because you're cutting hair. And anytime you cut hair, you are basically exposing that meat to hair. You can never cut between hair follicles. You're always going to end up with a bunch of little hair pieces stuck to that meat, but having some water really helps to be able to wash that off really quick. And you're going to end up with this. Now, my favorite part of squirrel hunting is eating the squirrels. And so there's a ton of different recipes. Yes, see, just like Mike said, the hair does not like to come off the meat. And I've actually started carrying, I forget, it's probably nylon, but it's like just an old like brush for dishes and stuff. I brought it brand new, so it's clean. But it's basically just got some very thick and stiff nylon bristles, and I have found that at getting that hair off meat. It's a lot easier on like deer meat just because the size of the portion makes it a lot easier to work with. But that hair really does stick to meat. So definitely again I like the little nylon brush, works quite well. But this is by far my favorite recipe to go through and eat squirrels. I feel like I get more yield out of it. Now you can certainly fry. I know Curtis, one of our friends and colleagues, loves fried squirrels. Anytime he kills squirrels, he's basically going to fry it. But I like to do kind of stews and stuff with it. So feel free to take a screenshot of this if you want. It's a really good recipe to get a lot of use out of squirrels. You can hide that squirrel and you can give people that. I don't recommend surprising people and say, "Hey, did you know you just ate a squirrel?" Because some that will really affect your relationship with some people.
Yeah.
But it's a great way to get people who are a little really squirrel. I guarantee it. If you did not tell them that was squirrel, they would not be able to tell it was squirrel. It's that good. So definitely check that out. And Curtis actually made. We had a workshop last weekend down at Crab Orchard National Wildlife Refuge, and he whipped up some squirrel buffalo dip. And so basically, he kind of stewed up those squirrels, removed all the meat, and basically turned it. He just took a normal buffalo chicken dip recipe that you find on anywhere on the internet and basically just substituted with squirrel, and it was delicious. And so that's one thing I want to highlight is if you're looking for unique ways to eat squirrel, you dig out that old family recipe book and any recipe that talks about chicken, substitute squirrel, and you're probably not going to be disappointed.
Yeah, I made like a full body squirrel, like buffalo, like I took a buffalo wing sauce, so buffalo chicken basically, and it's made the whole body. And it came out fine. It was good. Just the whole thing,
Nice.
basically a big chicken leg.
Yeah, yeah, right. And it's very good. And we get a lot of questions. What's better, tasting gray versus fox? If I'm hunting in an area that I'm getting a lot of fox squirrels, those are the squirrels I'm definitely going to do a stew with. I'm going to slow cook them. They're typically going to be a little tougher. They're not going to be as tender as a young gray squirrel can be. So usually with those fox squirrels, I'm going to do a dish like this or something like Jason said, turning into a dip. Where if I get a bunch of gray squirrels, then I might fry that sucker up and do basically Buffalo Wild Wing style squirrel quarters,
Mhm.
that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean Curtis is probably the main, like he'll squirrel hunt on purpose. Well, we almost do it as a side effect, but he even prefers squirrel meat over deer meat. I'm not in the same boat with him, but
I'm not either. It's very good. I do not prefer it as much as
yeah,
he. I love it, but yeah.
it's each their own. But he's a big squirrel guy. Yep.
Yep. And that's the nice thing about that's why I love hunting. Just not even talking squirrel hunt. There's so many different niches and avenues you can take to this stuff and really make it your own. Um, but that's about all I've got. So if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. And I do want to round out with just a little bit more strategies that we didn't necessarily talk about, and that's this concept of hunting in pairs. Hey, we tried to film a video. We've been having issues getting videos. It's been a nightmare. But essentially, Jason and I both mentioned at different times that we like to hunt in pairs with squirrel hunting. One of the biggest reasons why is squirrels have this tendency to freaking disappear on a tree. I've had so many squirrels where I'm like, okay, I watched that squirrel go up that tree. I know that tree doesn't have any cavities in it. Where is that darn thing at? And you will actually find where they will like pancake themselves along the back of a tree or up top along a horizontal limb and basically completely flatten out and just completely disappear. No movement, no sounds, nothing. Where when you have a pair, what's really advantageous is you can have one person on one side of the tree. All right, have your other person slowly sneak around to the back side of the tree. Now you're able to look at both sides of the trees. And chances are at that point, one of you is going to see the squirrel. Because the second that I've had it happen where I swear I was like playing ring around the rosy, ring around the tree with the squirrel, where I'm circling it, he's circling it, just staying a little bit ahead of me, but having that extra person on the back side, boom, one of you is going to get shot at some point. So hunting in pairs is great, whether it's a friend, a nephew, a son, daughter, your spouse, partner, anything. It can be a lot of fun.
Yep.
Ooh, good question. Is there a hard and fast rule like hickory nuts in August, walnuts in September, acorns in October? That's pretty, I mean, that's pretty darn spot on. Now, it obviously does change year to year just because the weather will have some impact on what that hickory crop looks like. But like for this year, that has been a very appropriate schedule you just laid out. Hickory nuts, they were keying in on very heavily in late August and into early September. They've started transitioning off of those. I see them starting to hit those black walnuts again. And then as the acorns start to mature, I acorns will probably start honestly in the next week or two.
Yeah,
I would
I've been
say
seeing them
so.
on the
Maybe
ground
not
already.
October. Maybe say mid to late September for acorns. But yes, and like you said, Onyx. Onyx has, and if you're not familiar with Onyx, it's basically this mobile app designed for hunters. There's several different companies. HuntStand has one. Onyx has one. And what I'm getting at with Onyx is, I'm sure Alex is here. He's probably asking about the oak and hickory layer. So they actually have a layer that you can turn on, and it basically creates a map that shows you where hickory and oak stands should be. Now, it's not always completely accurate, but it does give you a really good starting point because we can look at soil types, we can look at slopes, we can look at topography, we can look at terrain, and that's all going to tell us what natural trees we can expect to be in that area. And so Onyx just basically did some fancy algorithms and came up with this formula or this model that basically does that same thing. It takes all this data and converts it to, hey, this area should have a good stand of hickories and oaks in it. So, yes, you can definitely use that. I wouldn't rely on it completely, but it's a great starting point, especially what I like to use. Onyx and some of these other remote scouting, I mean, you can even use Google Earth, anything that you're getting some satellite imagery from, is really to start to narrow down my focus, right? And so I'm not necessarily using it to replace my in-person scouting, but what it really does is give me this 1,000 foot overview of, the site that Jason and I hunt, the public, one of the pieces of public land is like 3,000 acres. That can be quite daunting. Oh, where do I even start here? That's when I like to use the apps in a layer like that, where I can just kind of pinpoint, okay, well, this peninsula seems to have a big stand of oaks and hickories. Then I'm going to go in there and scout out that area.
Yeah, and
Another
then we have,
question.
yep,
Oh,
go ahead.
go
No, you
ahead.
got it. Oh, you got it. So yeah, the other question was, should you field dress them right away, or can you save them all to get back to the truck and then field dress them all at once?
So usually for me, it's a keep them all and clean them all when I get back to the truck or back to the house. And a lot of that is you've probably gotten hints here and there throughout this webinar. I don't like to do a ton of squirrel hunting in August. It's great because it's open and it's accessible and it's something to do before, most of the open hunting season starts. But I really prefer that October, November when the temperatures are cool for reasons just like that. Now, if it's a super hot day, now luckily this year has been relatively mild. We've had highs in like the low 70s the past week, which is absurd for this time of year. So on days like that, when it's 50 and 60 in the morning, I'll certainly carry those around for a few hours. Now, what I don't like to do, and you'll see some people do them, is they'll take just a little like fanny pack or a duffel bag, and they'll just put like 3 or 4 carcasses in there. I like to spread them out and let air naturally circulate. Again, that just creates a huge source of heat where they're just all sitting there kind of combined with each other. And so um, let me pull up a picture. Actually, Jason, do you still have Google open?
Yeah,
Could you pull up a duck call lanyard?
sure.
So that's what I use to carry my squirrels. You can use a duck call. There's a ton of different stuff out there, but it's basically just this paracord strap that allows me to dangle it around my shoulders or tie it to my waist, and it's got individual spots where the squirrels can kind of dangle off there. And again, that just gets a little bit more airflow to them. So on days like this year where it's in the 60s and 70s, I'm fine with that. But if I'm out and it's in the mid 90s, or upper 80s, then I'm going to really start processing them as I go and be very cognizant of meat waste. But yeah, so you can see this picture that Jason just dropped in the chat. These are duck call lanyards, but essentially you can use it to carry your ducks after a harvest, your pheasants after a harvest, or your squirrels. And so you just create a little, they've already got the loop there, just stick a squirrel head through it, tighten that loop up, and boom, you've got your way to carry squirrels where they're not all just kind of creating this massive heat source amongst each other.
I usually end up carrying them by the tails and just having like two or three.
That too, absolutely.
I've
Yep.
rarely ever limited out. Usually I only get in like two or three, so I usually just carry them around with me, and then go. But yeah, their bodies are so, it's not like a deer where like a deer is so thick that that heat just stays in the deer and doesn't dissipate after a while. The body's not thick enough to really hold the heat as much as a deer. So similar with waterfowl and ducks and birds and doves and other animals that you don't really need to field dress right away. Their body ratio is just smaller, so their heat's not the heat's not going to destroy the meat as quickly.
Right. And usually, I mean, just to put time again, temperature, temperature dictates everything. But I'm talking like if I was going to hunt from, 6 to 2 in the afternoon, then I'm probably not going to sit there and carry those squirrels around all day. But usually I'm wrapped up by like 8:30 or 9 o'clock or so. And at that point, I have no issues carrying squirrels for a few hours and let them kind of just naturally cool off.
Yeah. And it's not the heat that destroys them, it's bacterial growth
Right,
and
right.
rot.
Yep.
So the meat's not going to rot that quick. Yeah.
And trust your nose. Trust your nose.
Yeah.
That's a question we get a lot is how do you know when meat's bad? Your nose. Your nose will tell you. And if you happen to live with a female, whether it's a spouse, a daughter, maybe a neighbor, females have a much more developed olfactory system than men do. It's just the nature of human ecology. They can smell things better and differently than we men can. And so very often, again, hopefully your partner, your wife, or whoever you ask to smell it likes you a little bit, but trust their nose too. Hey, does this smell off? If it smells off, it's off. But 9 times out of 10, trust your nose.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for joining us tonight. We'll kind of wrap up there. If you have any other questions, I'll hang out for another 5 minutes or so. It's 7:20, so 4 minutes. I'll close out. And if you have any questions that you think of later on, feel free to email us, shoot us a message on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, all that fun jazz, and we're happy to help.
Yep. And then check out our future events. You were able to log on for this, so you'll figure out how to find that on our website. We also have Illinois Hunt Camp is coming up September 27th here in a couple weeks, and that's we'll be giving away a lot of mentored hunts. We have a lot of mentored squirrel hunts we try to get out. So we'll end up having a group of us get together with the coworkers that we have here, and we'll probably go hit one site all at once and kind of split up and have a nice group hunt, and then come back together again and see who was lucky and who wasn't.
You
That's
know what we should promote real quick just before we hop off?
what's up.
Just what you're talking about, Hunt Camp Hunts. We're giving away a really cool squirrel one that I'm excited about. So if you're interested in deer hunting and squirrel hunting, in late October, we're going to do a big trip down to the Shawnee National Forest, and we're going to do an archery deer hunt as well as a squirrel hunt. So you're going to get the best of both worlds. That's my favorite time of the year to squirrel hunt, late October. It's going to be a great time down in the Shawnee National Forest. So we're going to have quite a few spots for that hunt given away at Hunt Camp. So definitely check that one out if you're
Mhm.
interested. It's
Yeah,
going to be a
we'll
lot
be
of fun.
camping. We'll be camping for that too, so that'd be fun.
Yeah, yeah. Camping, hunting, eating our faces off. Yeah, it's great. Great time. Great time. Ah, good question. Can you go over the regulation about air gun that does not require a FOID since I'm an international student? That's a great question. Would you happen to could you private message me your email address? It's a little nuanced, and I'd rather talk to you directly over the phone sometime about it. If you've got time, maybe tomorrow, I can give you a phone call and we can go through that stuff because it's a little more nuanced, and I want to be able to pull up some documents and stuff to share you. So if you just shoot me your email address, and then I'll shoot you a quick email. Perfect, got it. Yep, the FOID card and not being able to get one because you're an international student, it does complicate a few things, but there are opportunities out there. And so I'll put together some documents and some other stuff and ship it your way tomorrow, and then I'll send you my phone number. And so if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to give me a ring.
Yeah. Yeah, good luck.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, thanks everybody. Have a good evening, and hopefully you get out and do some squirrel hunting. And if you do, send us some pictures and send us some favorite recipes. I'm always looking for new creative ways to use wild game. So if you ever have a family recipe that you try to substitute squirrel and it hits the spot, let me know.
Yeah, I wonder who got the squirrel today?
Chris.
Chris? Yeah, I wonder how Chris is gonna prepare his first squirrels.
Ooh, Alex is going to Clinton Lake this weekend for squirrels. That's what I like to hear. And you know what? That's one of the sites. that has probably the highest number of squirrels in the entire
Yeah.
state. Is that accurate, Jason?
They get over 300 a year. Yeah.
In terms of harvest, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
for harvest. Yeah, they get over 300 harvest squirrels a year at Clinton Lake. That's I think the main spot for squirrel hunting.
Ooh, Ray Norbit. We've got a buddy who deer hunted there last year, and he loved that place. Ah, perfect. If you live near, did you happen to be in my lecture earlier this week on Monday?
Mike wasn't.
Okay.
What about the international student there?
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. I remember you. Yeah, absolutely. Yep, yep, yep.
Oh, cool. Yeah, so at the Clinton Lake, yeah, the deer workshop. That's cool.
Awesome. Then yes, I can, especially because you're in my neck of the woods. We probably live less than like 10 miles from each other, so I will definitely help, and we will get you out hunting for sure.
Hmm.
Well, good luck, everybody. Take it easy, and I hope you have a good, productive fall. And again, we've got a whole plethora of deer stuff coming up. Ooh, squirrel chicken wings. Now we're
Yep.
talking. We've got a
Yeah, I
whole
did.
plethora of deer stuff coming up. So we've got Deer 101, Deer 102, some advanced deer bedding type stuff. So a lot of really cool webinars coming up that if you've taken some of our webinars before, we have some new ones coming. So I think you'll find those useful. So isn't it too late for deer permits? Lotteries are over. Uh, yes and no. So the lotteries are concluded. I can't recall if the third one is closed or not. However, archery hunting does not require a lottery, so you can buy those tags what we call over the counter, meaning you can just go to a point of sale, Walmart, Bass Pro, anywhere you can buy a hunting or fishing license, and you can buy those over the counter deer permits. And then if you're only interested in hunting with a firearm, there are remaining firearm permits. So any permits that are not allocated during the lottery become first come, first serve, and for sale over the counter. Now, the biggest caveat there is those are typically not for state land. Those are typically going to be county level firearm deer tags, which are really used on private land or federal land. And I mentioned federal land because we have the Shawnee National Forest, which is about 180,000 acres of national forest that you can hunt using a firearm county deer permit. So you don't even have to win a lottery. You can go buy one of the remaining tags. And so yes, you missed the lottery, but no, it is not too late. There are still a lot of options out there. And we actually have a Deer 101 webinar next Tuesday. So if you're interested in learning more about that, we are going to go through that entire process. Yep, crossbow it is.
Yep.
Exactly. Yep.
You'll be able to hunt crossbow to January 15th instead
Yep.
of just 7 days in November and December. You'll be able to
E-
hunt for months. So
Exactly. And for deer hunting, I prefer archery anyway. I did. So
yeah.
I put in for a lottery permit for deer firearm this year and I didn't draw one anyway. So I'm in the
Yep.
same. So I get to use my archery stuff. Even better. Awesome. All right. Well, thanks everybody. We'll see you around and hopefully we see you at some of our future events, future webinars. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Yep.